All right. So, hi everybody. Welcome to our RAAus Live Member Forum. I'm Jill Bailey. I'm the Head of Flight Operations, and with me today is Neil, our Head of Training and Development. How you going, Neil?
Good, thanks, Jill. Welcome everybody.
Yeah, thanks for coming along. What we want to do with these forums is just treat them the same way as we would when we actually come out to you at your club, which we've done before. And, it's great to sit in a room with a heap of people and say, what are the questions, what are the things that are really up your nose or causing you problems or you're excited about. So there's no questions off the table. We've got some questions from people already, thank you, which we'll go to soon. And if we don't know the answer, as usual, we won't make it up. We'll actually go and find the information and come back and give you that response appropriately. The other thing we want to do in future episodes of this same sort of broadcast is to talk about specific things that might be of interest to instructors or members on flying. As an example, we'd like to do one on loss of control. We're a really good topic for us to talk about because, as Neil knows, and as we've seen before in our information for our members, it's a pretty important area that we have problems with. And of course, we've got the coronavirus situation at the moment, which is just unprecedented in our time. We've never had to deal with anything like this in our generations, and particularly for RAAus as an organisation. And we're all trying to make sense of that as well, particularly operationally and for Jared in the tech and airworthiness area. So, look, what I wanted to talk about first off was just some topics that might be of interest in general form. The extensions that we've offered with work with CASA, and thank you to our colleagues in CASA for their swift work on extending BFRs for our members. So if your BFR falls between 1st of March and 31st of July, you have an automatic 90-day extension, which takes a lot of pressure off. I'm in exactly the same situation. That applies to instructor renewals as well. And it also applies to medicals of all sorts. There's a 6-month extension on medicals. So CASA has realised, and as have RAAus, the pressures that the situation puts on our members. So we don't want anyone to feel unsafe or operate unsafely or non-compliantly. So those extensions have been put in place, and you would have seen that as part of our e-news. And we've got some programs coming up soon too, once COVID-19 allows us to get out there into the world again, on instructor standardisation and proficiency, and also talking about spin training for instructors and upset prevention and recovery. And I might throw to Neil quickly for a quick overview of those two topics. Neil?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Yeah, look, upset recovery has probably received a fair bit of attention in the last 6 to 12 months. We've all heard some of the accidents and so on. It continues to be an area in loss of control. Generically, we see highly represented. In fact, it's one of our highest accident types even within RAAus. So making sure our instructors are competent in not only the recovery techniques in training environments, but also in regards to different types of aircraft. So we've got a range of initiatives. Part of our Group G proposal for our maximum increase in takeoff weights for our aircraft is going to require our instructors to be able to undertake spin recovery training. So it's an important element that not only enhance privileges, but also in terms of improving our skills, firstly with our instructors, but also our pilots, that we build on some of that work to actually make sure that our pilots and instructors are more capable in terms of these unusual attitudes and upset recovery states. And Jill and I have done quite a bit of work with a number of external partners in the last 6 to 12 months, as late as this week, and developing a syllabus and a package based around that. Thanks, Jill.
Cool, thanks, Neil. So just to clarify, the spin training requirement is for instructors, and we'll be offering, in addition, an upset prevention recovery training program for all members. So we're not mandating spin recovery for members, just for the instructors who are going to be out there in the field doing their thing. Now, we've got a few comments that have come up. We haven't, there we go, thank you. There's the first one. So the first question from Bill Ginn, g'day Bill, up there in Heckfield. Why is an aircraft with a low approach speed higher risk during the landing or takeoff phase than an aircraft with a higher approach speed? That's a really good question, Bill. I'll throw over to Neil for a quick summary of that, but we will spend some more time on something like this subject at a later date.
Yeah, thanks, Jill, and thanks, Bill. Thanks for the question. It's a good question, and it comes up a lot when we talk about loss of control incidents. Look, generically, the first thing we want to say is that aircraft should always be flown within the Pilot Operating Handbook recommendations. So the approach speeds that you should adopt should be based on your POH. So that's the first thing we want to talk about. Look, just generically, and we do need to take this offline, and I'm happy to do that. An aircraft with a lower inertia or lower airspeed, we're flying in situations where are not normal, so you might have a high crosswind component, a high degree of wind shear or wind gradient, then as you move through that changing air mass, your lower inertia is going to have a higher percent or be affected by a higher percentage of that. Now, we can discuss this further. We're going to run a whole series on loss of control and talk about this in terms of micrometeorology. But we see this quite prevalent in things like stall operations, where people tend to fly in fairly slow in order to get short field landings and even sometimes short field takeoffs. And as a result, we do sometimes see some loss of control accidents. So the question ties in very nicely with our loss of control development, and you'll be seeing more information on that in the near future. Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. I also just saw a comment pop up just before we go to Jennifer's, just to clarify on the spin requirement. If you have done spin training in a GFA aircraft or a CASA registered aircraft and you can provide recency in that, certainly we'll accept that. That's a good question, I think, from John that popped up in my live feed as I shouldn't be looking at because it distracts me. But anyway, on to the next question, which I think was from Jennifer, Jennifer Laird down in Deniliquin. Unclear to some whether one is legally allowed to take their aircraft for a fly during COVID-19 and what are the essential reasons. Awesome questions, Jennifer. And as an organisation, we don't want to sound like we're sitting on the fence, but it's not our job to give you an answer on that. We are more interested in making sure you're safe and compliant from our organisation's point of view. You have to make that decision for yourself based on your state requirements or restrictions, and also the requirements and restrictions that you might have on your aircraft or your own proficiency. And so there's nothing really particularly from the RAAus perspective stopping you from doing that, but you do have to comply with your physical distancing and COVID-19 restrictions. So we're hoping to get some more guidance on that in more detail from the Deputy PM. We've put a submission forward to ask for some clarity on that matter and ask for the clarity on a nationwide context, because at the moment we've got 7 states and territories giving 7 different responses. And as an example, I think Mick talked last week about the essential travel definition for maritime vessels for maintenance and storage was applicable to New South Wales and Victoria, and you could possibly extrapolate that to be just as relevant to maintaining and storing your aircraft and your hangar. But again, that advice is only relevant to New South Wales and Victoria. So what do you do when you're in Queensland or Tasmania or WA, who have all got very different types of requirements and restrictions? So I hope that kind of answers that question. It really hasn't given an answer in terms of a yes/no answer, Jennifer, and I'm sorry about that. But as you know, we work very hard to make sure we give information that's accurate to our members. So we don't want to go out there and start saying yes, no in a definite way when we haven't got that official advice from someone like the Deputy PM who can speak to that on a nationwide basis. We do have a heap of info on our RAAus website under a COVID-19 specific section. So Cody's just put that up. Thanks, Cody. So our organisation is /COVID-19-updates. And there's a whole heap of information in there ranging from what we're doing as an organisation during this time, which interestingly means that we've got 14 staff operating in the same way that Neil and I have been for the last 8 years, operating from home. You can see right now behind me my bookshelf, behind Neil his bookshelf. Our entire staff is operating from home, and it's a credit to Michael and Mick and the board that we actually were able to move so quickly to operating like that and keeping our staff safe. That's a good question. It's from no one in particular, but my BFR expires next week. What do I do? Well, my BFR on my flight review expired on the 7th of April. So I've got an automatic 90-day extension, as we just explained earlier. Neil, would you like to answer that question, seeing as I've been doing a bit of talking? I'll hand over to you.
That's fine. It's a good question, and it was one of the first things that we needed, that both CASA thankfully recognised, and we also recognised that pilots' compliance in terms of currency was an important part of whatever decisions they make regarding their own ongoing flying operations in the current period. So essentially, a pilot whose BFR is expired from the 1st of March for the following 3 months will get a 3 months extension on their BFR requirements. A pilot's BFR who then falls from that period from July through to September, I believe it is, will get a 2-month extension, and then somebody that comes in after that will get a 1-month extension. You can see the cascading elements of those extensions sort of work towards a December completion rate, where based on the current evidence that the health departments are providing to government, that's the expected period. What happens after that, we don't know, and that will be up to both the regulator and our discussions with the regulator, as the rest of industry, as to what happens. But right now, you have been granted and have nothing to do to take advantage of those extensions. We did put out an e-news last week, which actually gave a bit of a simple graphical description and an explanation of how that works. And we'd encourage you to go back and have a look at that member e-news. And then by all means, contact Jill or myself if you've got any further inquiries.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, the good part is you don't necessarily need to do anything if your BFR extends in those periods. It's actually an automatic extension, which is really, really helpful. There's another good question. What training is available to keep my skills up over this shutdown period? Well, I'm actually going to hand back over to Neil on that, because that's right in his ballpark as Head of Training and Development.
Yeah, thanks again, Jill. Training is an important part of what RAAus does. It's not the only part. We fly recreationally, but for those pilots that are actually engaged in their training process and have had their training suspended temporarily, it's important that they keep currency in their learning, not just their flying. And this is a great opportunity to hit the books and actually look at some of the reference material that's available, both from their flight schools, which a lot of flight schools are providing their own direct communications to their students through their online learning and their briefings. But RAAus has also developed a range of materials from the flight instructor reference manual for those instructors. It's also very pertinent to pilots, and that's available through the RAAus shop for purchase, and it's also available online. But the other thing is we've actually, as you may have seen in one of our recent news, we're starting to look at collaborations with other industry partners that actually have got a range of training initiatives and that support flight training at the RAAus level. And I'm proud to announce that we did this with Go Fly Online in the last week, and we've already had an extraordinarily successful uptake of RAAus members who receive a special offer, registering and looking at actual visual and video representations of all the flight lessons. And there's soon to be a Q&A session to be released on that. Now, that's available to RAAus members. It's another great reason to keep the continuity of your RAAus membership. And it's just one of a range of initiatives we're rolling out, along with the development of our online learning management system, our LMS, and other collaborations that I've been working on as late as today in terms of other online training resources that pilots and students can actually avail of to keep themselves current and continue their learning journey with RAAus.
Awesome. Here's a question from Juan Sebastian Toro. My RAAus subscription expired on the 14th of August. What should I do? Should I get an extension? So, Juan, I'm not quite sure if you're talking about your membership there. If your RAAus membership has expired on that date, then you've got a couple of choices, and we are offering for some of those members who have some financial hardship, and there's obviously a number of members that have been very badly affected by the COVID-19 restrictions. We have offered opportunities for those members to extend or to pay their memberships in smaller amounts, so 3-month or 6-month amounts. If you have a specific hardship circumstance, please contact us and talk to us. You may be aware of some organisations that have extended memberships just across the board. As an organisation, we spent quite a bit of time, and Michael obviously was working very closely with our finance manager to work out the impact, not just for members, but on the organisation of us doing that. And we haven't necessarily rushed to come up with that response, purely because we want to monitor what's going on with the restrictions and what the impact is going to be. So, one, I'd just direct you to send us an email, and that email can go to members@raaus.com.au, and just put your circumstances forward if you've got some financial hardship. However, if you want to go flying, then you should be a current member. So don't let that fall off the radar. There's no way you can operate an RAAus aircraft without being an RAAus member, and we certainly don't want to be chasing people for flying without being current members. I thought I might give some background for people about what's going on with our schools, and that's obviously an area that Neil and I both interact with very heavily. We did a survey recently, and I'd like to thank I think it was 128 CFIs from our 151 that responded. That gave us a really good response rate, and we determined from that we've had 72% of our schools have actually voluntarily stopped flight training. And that's a reflection on the fact that it's pretty hard to maintain 1.5 metre physical distancing in a cockpit. Our aircraft are not that big, and some of our CFIs are a little more mature, shall we say, and that might be putting them at a higher risk of some complications if they were to catch COVID-19. A lot of the responses talked about their determination for deciding to close the school down based on their personal health factors, but also on their student health, the risk that they might have community transmission by having a student operate an aircraft that someone else has operated in. There's state restrictions, obviously, that have applied. Some schools have continued because the various states have said, nothing particularly about flight training. There's moral and ethical decisions, in those sorts of considerations as to whether, as a CFI, you should or decide it's appropriate to continue. And, if any of our schools are operating with these restrictions or have any questions, very, very happy to answer those sorts of questions. We're keeping a bit of a log of those questions as well, so we can actually give some guidance to government as an organisation. RAAus works very closely with a range of government departments, and we've been asked, we've been working quite a lot with our other sister organisations, with SAFA, with GFA, etc. And we've been all basically struggling to try and work out what the impacts are on our members and what our members should be doing, or what our schools particularly should be doing. So there's that. There's also, I guess the other question that we could be talking about is probably the increase in max takeoff weight, which Neil spoke about earlier. But before we do that, we've got a question here from Neil Sidwell. If you have a calendar-based maintenance due and you need to fly to a LAMI to get it done, what are you supposed to do? That's a really good question, Neil, and it's going to depend very much on where you're located and whether you have to cross state borders, as an example, to do that for a start. Maintenance on an aircraft that's calendar-based is critical to get done at that time, but I think probably we'll defer that answer for Jared to come back to you with more specific information, being more a technical question than an ops area. We try not to necessarily get involved in each other's areas there, because we are very familiar with our own areas rather than getting into a technical area. But I do have a bit of update on our scholarships. Michael and Mick talked about this last week as well. Our scholarship program is not being stopped, but we are delaying applications purely because of the issues that COVID-19 presents. And I understand that we've also allowed an extra period of time for our scholarships to be used. So people that have scholarship amounts that were supposed to be finished by the end of this June, they've got an extra period of time to take up that funds once the schools go back to operating again. So keep those questions flowing. We've got some good comments, and very happy to take questions. Next week, as an example, we'll have Jared Smith, our Head of Airworthiness and Maintenance, and Darren Barnfield operating in the technical area. So that's where you throw your questions about aircraft maintenance. Jared's put some information up on our COVID-19 site, which talks about how to prepare your aircraft for storage if you decide not to fly during COVID-19. So I definitely urge people to have a look at those resources. Here's another question. What is the definition of a runway loss of control? Is it a hard landing? Is a hard landing a loss of control? Depends how hard the landing is. If you can't use the aeroplane again, I'd say it's definitely a loss of control. We've all had hard landings in aircraft, particularly instructors that have to allow students to explore the envelope of what the aircraft is capable of and what they're capable of. But Neil, if you want to answer that one, I've been
Yeah, more than happy to, Jill. I covered this in definition in the presentation in the loss of control video that we presented in 2016 and 17. And it's a very good question. So first of all, we don't just come up with these terms. These are ICAO terms in terms of defining the types of incidents and accidents that happen to aircraft. So LOC, or loss of control, is the generic term. And there are subsets that basically are applied by both ICAO, EASA, and also the relevant NAAs like ATSB when we assess and record accidents and incidents. So a runway loss of control is a loss of control event. So that is an event where the parameters that were expected to be managed by the pilot in a procedure or in a normal landing were not managed effectively and resulted in an outcome that was not determined by the pilot. So that's a loss of control. So basically, if you were determining to land on a runway and you actually touched down and you ran off the runway, you were outside not only of tolerances, but that wasn't the intended consequence. So it was something that was unintended. And it could result in damage. It may not result in damage. A runway loss of control is an event that happens in the takeoff or landing phase of flight. Okay, so it does extend to along the approach paths so that we look at low speed flight, either in the approach or in the takeoff phase of flight. So there's more information. You'll see specific definitions. We cover these definitions in our professional development series with instructors, but there's also definitions available through ICAO, through the ATSB. They do a very good series on loss of control through their handbooks as well, and you can have a look on our RAAus member presentations as well. Thanks, Jill.
Awesome. Thanks, Neil. So I started talking about MTOW and the increase, got sidetracked by some questions, which was fine. That's the whole purpose of us being here. The MTOW increase is obviously still very much on our agenda, even though we're being slightly sidetracked at the moment with COVID questions. In the background, the team is still working quite closely with CASA on the increase in max takeoff weight to 760. So in broad terms, we're going to be creating a new category called Group G. So at the moment, the majority of our pilots are Group A pilots, which is 3 axis up to 600 kilos. Group G is going to be 601 to 760, and eventually we are working towards 1500 as a max takeoff weight, as an end game. So we'll be issuing Group G ratings and approvals to our instructor cohort based on them having appropriate experience in that category of aircraft. So if someone has CASA qualification, obviously they can instruct in aircraft up to 5,700 kilos. We'll recognise that and issue Group G on that basis. Any of our instructors that might be in the similar boat to me, as an example, I don't have an instructor rating in the CASA world, but I do have a PPL. So if we show appropriate experience and we have some additional training for the additional requirements for aircraft that are a bit heavier than 601, that cohort of instructors should be able to be issued with a Group G as well. And then obviously once we have our instructors approved and okay to train, we approve schools to do the same, and then we start interacting with the membership. And again, if members already have qualifications in the CASA world, that's where we'll recognise that for Group G pilot certificate groupings. And again, if we need to, we can obviously train our pilots that haven't flown in something heavier than 600 kilos for Group G. But all of that is all dependent on us actually getting the green light and the go-ahead from CASA legislatively to do that. So this is just in the nature of general information. And at the moment, we're obviously, as I say, working quite hard in the background with CASA on that. Another question here about whether a hard landing is a reportable incident and how do I report it? You want to take that one again, Neil?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, that did pop up a little earlier, I think, but wasn't directly related to the question I was answering. So again, if a hard landing is outside the parameters of what you expect, then it generally is a reportable. Now, it's sort of defined as an incident, not an accident, because there was no damage, there was no injury, and it wasn't a near miss. So it doesn't classify as what we call an IRM, an immediately reportable matter, but it is a reportable matter. And the reason it's reportable is this. So, and I'll answer where we report it in a moment, is if that aircraft was to sustain a series of hard landings as a training aircraft or even as a private aircraft over a period of a long time, which could have resulted in excessive forces being distributed through the wing, the spar, the root, the undercarriage, any of the systems that are associated with that aircraft. then there's no trail to actually identify if that aircraft was to fail 6 months down the track. We've got no history in terms of operation, who was flying the aircraft, how it was being used, and also is it more pertinent to one aircraft type than another aircraft type. So the reporting of incidents is absolutely imperative, and I must stress that in 99.99% of cases, we take no action at all against the pilot, the member, the owner of the aircraft. It's simply recording of information so we can build a database, which we're getting a very good database now of the types of incidents, both mechanical, operational. And we use that as part of our safety management system. Who do we report it to? If it's an accident, it has to be reported as soon as possible via telephone or any means possible to the ATSB immediately. And of course, you have a responsibility to put a written report in within 72 hours. We've made that process very easy for RAAus members through the occurrence management system, where you simply log on either through the public page or through your member portal, and you can actually create and put in all the details for an occurrence report. That will satisfy your RAAus obligations, but we also strip that data and send it to the ATSB to satisfy your mandatory requirements for reporting to the ATSB. So have a look at it. We've got a wrap on reporting incidents and accidents, and Cody, our safety manager, Jill or myself are more than happy to take direct questions or emails after you've had a look at those resources that we've got online. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Neil. Hey, big shout out to Matt Clancy. Hey, Matt. Matt's an officer that we've worked with in the past in our fatal accidents, which is an unfortunate part of what it is that we have to do as an organisation, and we rely a lot on the interactions and help of people like Matt to do that. So Matt's question is RAAus still able to assist in air crash investigations? Absolutely, Matt. If the police invite us, as you know, we can't walk on site as the ATSB can. We don't have legislative power to do that. But we offer and reach out to police at the time of an accident that occurs, and we offer our subject matter expert information, which would refer to something as simple as the aircraft type. We give information about the pilot's training history. We give information about all sorts of factors that relate to the investigation. And then we finally produce a report that goes to support the report the police officer has given to the coroner. And from there, it's handing over to the police and coroner to manage that. If they identify something that's of a serious safety concern for them, they then come back to us and we'll obviously work with them to get information out to the membership. And one of the key questions that keeps coming up is why don't we give information about accidents in a more specific form? And you'll know that we put out information now related to a serious or fatal accident fairly quickly. But unfortunately, as I said earlier, we're not able to avail ourselves of the Transport Safety Investigations Act that the ATSB operates under, and therefore we have no protection as an organisation if we were to publish information about that accident in more specific detail. Having said that, though, if there is something that's of an immediate safety matter or a aircraft-specific issue or training issue or something that relates to safety, you can be sure that we will actually act to make sure that doesn't occur again if it's at all possible. So that's a little bit of an overview, and Matt's come back with another one. Thanks, Matt. Do we investigate every report? We actually read every report. They're not just filed away. We've got quite a process with the team that Janelle, our safety coordinator, and Cody is our safety manager, Neil and myself in the ops sphere, and Jared and Darren in the technical area. We do read every report. We may simply just note the report and keep it for statistical purposes. But in the ops sphere, we do try to ring most pilots and just have a chat because sometimes, you know, it's nice to reach out with a human face as well. You know, we've all been involved in accidents or incidents. If you haven't, then you've probably not, you know, been flying long enough. It will happen. And one of the things that we need to do as an organisation is remember we're all human. We're all pilots. And we do like to reach out and talk to our pilots and just chat about the circumstances. But as Neil said earlier, quite rightly, very rarely do we take some sort of action against the pilot unless there's some obvious or willful act that was done. If the pilot's compliant, let's just all learn from that information. Oh, Matt, now you're just making me blush. I really appreciated Matt's input. That was we were working on an accident in Katoomba and it was a bit of a challenging investigation, and the support we got from New South Wales Police was awesome, as it is from the majority of police forces in the country. We're dealing with the state police in every circumstance, and sometimes we're dealing with a poor, lonely constable in a solitary area command in some place out in the middle of nowhere who's got no idea about aircraft and is really grateful for any support and help that we can give. So it's a two-way street, Matt, but thanks very much for your comments. It's very nice. One of the things we can do, and we're getting close to wrapping up if there's not a heap of questions to go, but one of the things we can do while we're not flying is the stuff we don't like to do. And what would that be? Filling out your logbook. I don't know how many times we come up to see schools or talk to instructors or pilots, and the sheepish look comes over their face and they say, yeah, my logbook's a little bit out of date. No one likes to spend time sitting down writing their logbook up. I tend to turn it around a little bit and think this is an opportunity right now while we can't fly to get that documentation up to date, but then it's an opportunity to do some time travel. So you go back to your first entry in your logbook and you see the effects of controls lesson or the TIF lesson that you undertook with your CFI, it should immediately evoke that excitement and the fun of flying. And for me, I go back through and say to myself, wow, look at the people I've gotten to fly with, the experienced people, the new students. You know, Neil and I have done some flights together. Every time I read those logbook entries, it just evokes that flight. Neil, you got any special memories of any logbook entries that might trigger something a bit exciting or interesting?
Yeah, 40 years of flying, you get a few notes in there, but some of them relate back to my gliding days and hang gliding and so on. Look, I think the important thing is that there are a lot of things we can do, and getting you might be going out to do some new endorsements, adding some things when we come out of all of this, if you're not continuing to fly. I think one of the first things I do as an instructor is I like to see a logbook that's up to date, filled out the front sections. How much time have you done? Have you added up your time and your types? So that you know what type time you've done, so that when you're going to convert to a new aircraft, you've got stuff like that. So the logbooks is one of many things that we can do, and we're putting out some more information over the next few weeks about things to do while in isolation, other than kick footballs and toilet paper around. So we'll be doing some of that. Jill, we've got a question. I think a lot of people are keen. Mick and Michael talked last week about Sport Pilot. And the magazine. It's been an important mechanism. It was one of the original communication mechanisms, and the only communication mechanism we had with members. Over 30 years or more than that, we've evolved into a fairly complex communication systems throughout society, and you can see this is a good example of stuff that we weren't doing 30 years ago for sure. But Sport Pilot is making a comeback, and Mick and Michael talked about that. And Jill, I might just hand over if you want to just cover a few more parts about that in terms of when, how much, and what we're going to see.
Thanks, Neil. I'm not quite sure that there is a how much. I think the intent that Michael and Mick were talking about was to have it back for all members as it was, as part of the membership cost. And it's credit to Michael and Mick and the rest of the board for the financial management and the secure position they've put the organisation in. If we were in the position we are now with COVID-19 6 or 8 years ago, we might have been in a vastly different world. So what's happened is Michael and Mick have spent quite a bit of time, and we've all worked hard as a team to get best value for the organisation and build up some cash reserves to the point now where we can actually produce Sport Pilot 3 times a year. And have that go out to members. So look forward to that. There's going to be some good content, and I'm looking forward to writing again for it. I did want to go back a little bit, though. I saw a comment there from Josh saying that he never understood the do it later attitude to the logbook and always fills it out at the end of the flight. I kind of agree, Josh, but I don't know why people don't sort of seem to think that that's as important. But yeah, I've used to do the same thing. It's done and it's finished that way. You know, you don't have to remember it. Now, Richard, you got a good question here. My timber prop delaminated mid-flight. That would have been a bit exciting. Should I have reported it? I've replaced it. Well, yes, it'd be really great if you did report that. If you know why it delaminated, whether you'd flown through some rain or whether there was a problem with the way that the prop was mounted or fitted, or there was some sort of manufacturing fault, really critical information. And apart from anything else, it would have been a good yarn. I would have liked to have talked to you about how you managed that, because I can imagine it probably shook the heck out of the plane and might have given you a bit of excitement. So yeah, by all means. The other thing that we'd like to do relating to that, Richard, is if you've got a story like that, maybe write it up and we can put it into Sport Pilot or into one of our License to Learns. We produced a bit of publication a little while ago called the Safety Digest, which was something similar to the Close Calls that CASA puts out. And we had some really good stories, including stories from our CEO, from our chair, Mick. I think, Neil, you wrote a story in there as well, and I think we even had a story from Leah, our previous innovation and improvement executive. So, tell people about these things. None of us can live long enough to make all the mistakes or have all the experiences. So let's write about it. And Lloyd, hey from Tasmania, from isolated Tasmania. Thanks for the engagement, Lloyd. And I think it's a great way to engage when we can't actually get out there anymore. I've really enjoyed it. And
Jill, I just want to add one thing to Richard's comment. Michael Linky, our CEO, makes a very important point about reporting and reporting culture, is that every time you don't report something that happens, you actually rob our members of the opportunity to learn. So just think about, if you want to pay it forward, reporting of defects and anything that's happened. We don't care if we get 5,000 reports. We'll wade through them and look at them and risk assess them. But if you put that information forward, then the chances are somebody else could be experiencing or be likely to experience a similar situation. So I love that saying, that by not reporting, we actually deny our fellow members the opportunity to learn. I think it's a great way to look at the concept and the ethos of reporting cultures. So thanks for the question. It was a great question. Sorry, Jill. I just think that was it's a good question to get to the membership about reporting.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. That's the whole point. We're here to talk, and we're here to learn from each other. And as you said, if we don't report or we don't give that information, how are we going to learn about it? So there's a couple of updates popping up there about our COVID-19 page, and obviously our main RAAus page as normal. There's a heap of information on there. There's a heap of development work that Neil's putting together for some ideas and areas for you while you might be stuck at home not being able to fly. But I think that's pretty much going to wrap our broadcast up, unless there's any more last-minute questions. Hey, there's Mary. How you going, Mary?
So just for next week, guys, same time, same channel, 12:30. I believe we're going to have Jared, our tech team, with Darren Barnfield and Jared Smith. They're going to be presenting. I see a few tech questions came up today as well. They'll also be addressed and go straight into the questions for next week as well. And we'd encourage you to send us in any questions you have of technical nature, and we can address those and just have a general chat about maintenance and all things airworthiness next week as well.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a good prompt. Send your questions for the tech team broadcast next week at media@raaus.com.au, and they'll do the same as we did with the questions from Jennifer and Bill and all the other people who put some points forward. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to everyone today, and we'll look forward to doing it again soon. Thanks again. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks very much, everyone. Fly safe.
Bye, everybody.
Safe.